My name is Meg O'Malley, and I'm the Vice Chair of FEI Dallas's Professional Development Committee. We're the team that arranges and selects the speakers for these afternoon sessions. So I want to get right to it and introduce Ruel Bognet. He's the Audit Director with BDO here in Dallas. And BDO is a longtime platinum sponsor of FEI, so thank you for that. Ruel has been with BDO for 6 years, serving both private and public companies in a variety of industries, including manufacturing, energy, and hospitality. Ruel would introduce his colleague tonight, Amy Rochik, who will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. Welcome, Ruel.
Thank you for Amy. Thanks, Meg. Appreciate the introduction. Happy New Year, everyone. It's always good. I think I've never been back here since before the pandemic. So quickly want to introduce Amy Rochik. She's a partner with BDO's National Assurance Practice Office and has over 26 years of professional experience. She is the founder and she directs BDO's Center for Corporate Governance and Financial Reporting, which is designed for financial executives and those charged with governance, both for private and public companies. Amy is also involved in developing the firm's board of director forums, as well as participates in external events and for corporate directors. She is responsible for publication and issuance of BDO's annual voluntary audit quality reports and tools and templates supporting communications with audit committees. Amy currently serves as the BDO's policy lead to and participates on the Center for Audit Quality's Advisory Committee and has assisted in CAQ initiatives, including audit committee communications and audit quality indicators. She is also a certified National Association of Corporate Directors Governance Fellow and contributor to NACD National and Chapter Curricula. So Amy, welcome to FEI Dallas.
Caution, I made the call for me in Boston as a teammate of my daughter's tested positive for COVID last week. So we're all doing well here, it's a common scenario, so hopefully we'll be all out of quarantine shortly. But for that, at least we have technology to support our program here today. So thank you again to FEI for making that work for me. I'm really, really excited to be joined by 3 fellow panelists today, all who have significant amount of business experience as well as board experience to share with you all today. So first we have Renee Baker-Arrington, who is President and COO of Pearson Partners International and focused on recruiting of board and executive talent in Fortune 500 companies, private equity-backed businesses, as well as nonprofits. She serves on Pearson's board of directors and provides leadership to the technology practice. And she further serves on the boards of IIC Partners, Rethink Results, NACD Dallas, and the Foundation for Young Women's Leadership Academy in Fort Worth. Renee works across many industries, including technology, retail, financial services, business services, manufacturing, distribution, and R&D. And she was named to the 2021 DCEO Dallas 500 list, so congratulations, Renee. And in 2019, she was named an HMG Strategy Technology Executive to Watch. So that's Renee. Dr. Pat Connolly is also with us today, and she is the CEO and founding partner of SMC Squared, focused on optimizing offshore IT services for U.S. companies. And her prior leadership roles have spanned Fortune 500 companies, think tanks, Big Four consulting firms, academia, as well as startups. She's been recognized as an EY Entrepreneur of the Year nominee and featured in the CEO and is founder of the MAX and partnering with DF Alliance Technology for Women in support of young STEM talent. So her board service includes her own company at SMC Squared, as well as Bank Cherokee, Old National Bank, the Risk Leadership Initiative of the University of St. Thomas, the DFW, ATW, and Tickets for Kids. And she also holds a PhD in Risk Corporate Strategy and Leadership. So welcome to Patricia.
Thank you.
And then Florence Flo is the COO at Synerzip, a software development firm. And prior to this, she's held financial leadership roles at high-growth technology firms, including Easy Links and iSight Partners, as well as in private equity at Hudson Advisors and at Fortune 500 firms, including Capital One and American Airlines. She's also involved in Dallas Tech Community in Dallas as a mentor to startups at Capital Factory and BMS and TX, a mentoring group working with UTD, UTA, and UC Southwestern. And she began as a software engineer with IBM. Her board service includes Refugee Services of Texas, FEI Dallas, the University of Chicago Dallas Alumni Group, as well as the Dallas Business Club. So my pleasure at being in the company of such accomplished professionals. So what we intend to discuss with you all today, and I do want to welcome and acknowledge all of our virtual and our in-person guests today. So thank you all for making this part of your evening activities today. But we are going to look at and discuss the considerations in the approach to board service and how to prepare yourself to be an effective director. So we've broken this discussion into some distinct areas. The first, we'll talk about getting to the boardroom. So taking stock, how you're preparing yourself, how you leverage networks, and how you're communicating your intentions to join a board. And we'll follow that with some more practical advice on becoming an effective member in the board. Along the way, we'll share both personal stories and resources for you to consider. And I should mention that we do welcome your questions, and we do intend to reserve time at the end of the program to address them all, so don't be shy. I believe I'll pause in a moment to let Nancy give some CPE disclaimers and instructions, but I do want to make it a point. We would like this interactive, and we will take your questions towards the end of the program. So Nancy, why don't I pause there and make sure we give ample time for CPE and chat discussion.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to my CPE slide, folks, and I'm going to launch my first CPE question for you today. Today we're asking you if you'd like to earn CPE credits for today's presentation, and while you're answering that, I'm going to let you know the rules of engagement for CPE. To be eligible for CPE today, you need to answer 5 of the 6 polling questions presented throughout the presentation and do at least 75 minutes of the presentation time. Typically, we send a CPE notification email when the credits are available, and that takes 7 to 10 business days. We are unable to grant CPE credits in cases where technical difficulties preclude eligibility. CPE program sponsorship guidelines prohibit us from issuing credit to those not verified by the technology to satisfy the minimum requirements as stated. And in accordance with the standards of the National Registry of CPE Sponsors, CPE credit will be granted based on a 15-minute hour. Back to you, Amy.
All right, thank you. All right, so to begin, we do want to get a sense of our audience. So for our virtual guests, I'm going to ask that you respond online to our polling questions. And then for our in-person guests, I'm sorry, it's popping up in the middle of the screen. Sorry, for our in-person guests, we will go the high-tech way with a show of hands. So for those answering affirmatively, yes, I would simply ask for a show of hands, and Renee can kind of convey in person to add to our shared virtual results. So I think we'll give everyone a second to complete your online answers, and then if Nancy will push the poll out, and maybe Renee, if you don't mind, letting us know by show of hands who in the audience is currently serving on any board.
Right, so who in our audience here in the room is currently serving on any kind of a board? Just show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lights in my way, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. About 12, I would say. Does that sound about right to everyone? Yeah, so about 12 in our room, Amy.
Okay, then online we have about a little over half of our folks, so 56% have answered yes affirmatively that they are currently serving on boards. Okay, so that's a good indicator. So we have probably about, I don't know, a little less than half that have not yet served on a board, at least from the online position. What does that look like in person?
Probably about the same, about half or a little less than half.
All right, so our next question has to do with, are you currently actively seeking a board seat?
Right, so show of hands in the room, who currently might be seeking a board seat in the room today? So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so probably about a quarter. Does that feel about right, everyone? Yeah. In a room full of finance executives, I should do better. Forgive me.
And what do we have online, Nancy? Okay, so similar. About a third are actively seeking the board seat from our guests online. All right. So, first topic, we thought we would provide a little perspective in terms of approaching board service for those contemplating this journey, and maybe some refreshers or some better tips and practices for those of you who are already on this journey but want to expand your board service roles. So, one thing that came out of our pre-planning call, and that in my experience in speaking with directors, which I do on a quite a daily basis, is that everyone's approach and experience has been unique, and there's really not necessarily a singular approach. However, each journey typically begins with self-reflection and an honest answer as to why you would like to be on a board and what you intend to contribute. So, Renee, I would love to start by asking you for some of the critical initial self-evaluation, preparation that you've seen work for director, those seeking director positions, and maybe share a little bit about your own journey on the way to this.
Thank you for that question, Amy. Happy to do so. I really think the most important thing when you're seeking any executive position, whether it's on a board or in the C-suite, is to know yourself and to fully understand your capabilities, your value proposition, and what you bring to the party, right? Are you someone that is strategic? Are you someone who is tactical? Are you someone with a results-oriented track record, et cetera? So really knowing yourself is the first way to go. And you can do that a number of different ways. There are actual assessment instruments. I'm sure, show of hands in the room, many of us have done Myers-Briggs or Berkman or those kinds of self-reflection instruments. They can be very helpful to you as you're looking at your value proposition through the lens of, I want to serve on a board, right? So that's an important step, is to understand what value you bring. And you really almost have to build that business case for yourself so that you can convince your contact in the board world, whether it's the chair of Nom and Gov, or the search firm with whom you're working, or your buddy who's on that board and wants you on it. You really have to build that business case for yourself. Why am I a fit to a board of directors? What's the value proposition that I bring, right? So knowing yourself foundationally is the best place to start. And in my own experience, I find that to be true as well. I'm on the board of directors for my own business, of course, and also for our global network called IIC Partners, where I serve as vice chair of the Americas. And I bring to that board strategic thinking skills, right? So that's one of my big value propositions on any board on which I serve. So those are a couple of tips. There are many others, but that's a good jumping off point. Amy, would you say?
No, I definitely agree. And I do want to give a chance for both Patricia and Florence to jump in here and talk about, what they've found in their experience. So
yeah, I'd be happy to. So when I was beginning to consider a board position, actually, I'll give you a little story. The very first paid board position was with a bank. So I spent most of my career in retail. I spent 25 years at Target. So I'm looking at this CEO going, why would you want me? It was kind of a funny situation. But he had done quite a bit of research on what he wanted, what was the criteria for that position, and oddly enough, he had done quite a bit of research on me. So he showed up with a pack of paper that thick, clipped together with my Facebook page picture on the very front, which scared the heck out of me because I'm not a Facebook person. But he spent a lot of time, I think, really educating me at that point on what was important to him seeking somebody to join his board. Agreeing completely with Renee, it had a lot to do with fit and culture and values, but he was also trying to check some very specific boxes around technology and risk management and diversity. So it was interesting when I asked him, how did you find me? He had gone to colleagues and said, who would you recommend? And came up with a short list. So maybe the words of wisdom, if I could, what I learned out of that was you never know who's looking at you. You never know how you're being assessed, even for situations and roles that you think are completely outside your box. That might be exactly the fit that they're trying to get to. So I would just pay attention to your environment, if you will, and who's around you, and as you're thinking about board positions, be very open-minded as to what that circle could look like.
Thank you for that. Florence, what about yourself?
Yeah. Let me share how I joined my first, what I really call my first real board. I've always been interested in service, and I've always been on several alumni association, professional association boards, but I wasn't looking for a board to join. So I commend all of you, and for those of you at home, I just want to give you a bird's eye view of the room. We have about 10 tables and about 4 maximum people at each table. So it's a very safe environment here. So thank you to FEI for doing such a great job of hosting this event. But I wasn't looking for a board position to join. And what happened in this instance for me is it was really the right fit. I happened to know this individual who was also on the board of Refugee Services of Texas, a nonprofit board and organization. And they needed someone with private company experience, especially finance experience, and I fit the bill. It was happenstance, but it also ended up being something that they really needed on the board, or need on the board at this time.
Thank you. That's great. I think for it's interesting. So BDO just launched, as part of our Center for Corporate Governance, we just launched a podcast series this summer. And the first kind of, I'd say a series within a series that we opted to launch was Getting to the Boardroom. And we interviewed a variety of corporate directors who serve on a variety of boards, public, private, not-for-profit. And each one had a different story, and the majority of the individuals that asked that question, what was how did you get on your first board? A lot of it, oddly enough, was luck and circumstance. Yeah. However, what the other folks have been saying, and what I take away from a lot of the commentary I usually get, is one of the things that goes along with that so-called luck and circumstance is the understanding that number one, you have the skills that are recognizable by boards that you're seeking to work on or that you've been selected to work on. Number two is usually most individuals have enabled themselves by articulating their desire to be on boards. And I work in a partnership, and for the life of me, I still wonder how people kind of get through the process of being on a partnership without letting people know that they want to make partner. I think it's the same for a board of director. It's under articulating your career aspirations, your desires to hold certain positions. It doesn't usually just happen to you, right? You need to kind of make it known what you're seeking, but also why you're seeking it. So one of the things that we're going to get into, and I think it was Renee that said the value proposition. You have to have your own personal branding and value proposition as to why you want to be on board. And we can get into some of those nuances in a little bit with some of our other questions. But I do think taking an inventory and putting pen to paper about the types of attributes you already possess, and then taking kind of a full stop on what you may need to work on. What skill sets might you be lacking that are needed today in corporate governance? So I think really just, and then defining that by the type of board you're looking to get on, right? So not-for-profit boards, private company boards, public company boards, there's a lot of similarities in the governance aspects of being on a board, but there's also many differences between those 3 types of boards, and then you also have advisory boards and other types of boards. So I think you have to be really start to be narrowing your focus into where you may be a best fit. So that's some of the kind of initial things I wanted to talk about there. And then I think one of the things I said before is taking stock of your skill sets is really needing to assess whether you have to enhance your skill set currently. So for many boards, whether you're private, public, or nonprofit, cybersecurity is an area of increased risk. How knowledgeable are you as an individual about things like that? what is your plan for continuing education? What is your plan for educating about governance in general? I think that's an important first step to take for many companies that may not necessarily understand what assuming a board seat is. Like I always tell the story of when I'm at a dinner party and a fellow that I know, who shall be nameless, when they ask, oh, so what do you do? I said, oh, I work in corporate governance. I engage often with directors. And he made the comment, said, oh yeah, when I get tired of what I'm doing now, I think I'll join a board.
So,
that is truly, that normally doesn't happen to most people unless, you're the CEO of GE or whatever. But
Amy, can I share something real quick? Your story reminds me of my father-in-law who they retired to a golf community, and he said he'd learned to play golf when he retired, and of course he never did. So I shared my story about the fact that I was not looking for a board position, also because I think it is important to be strategic once you know you are looking for, unlike me, looking for a board position. But what I did once I joined the board, I joined the NACD that I know Renee is on the board of, which is an educational organization for directors. And the more I learned about it, I think it's good to be strategic about what you want to do, but I don't think you can obsess about it either, because your center of excellence, what you know is really what you can offer to the world. And it's some of it, to me, a little bit is trying to figure out what your, where you can apply that. For instance, I have no marketing background at all. I cannot offer that to any board or any company. And I can't get better at it, So I think knowing that and being, going from starting from where your strengths are is probably a good way to get started. Don't try to play golf if you don't play golf.
Good point. Maybe we can shift into everybody's, I shouldn't say everybody. There are many people out there who fear and dread networking. And I think that's probably not, the way I look at networking is I look at it as more of mentoring and collaborating with individuals I may not know yet. Maybe that's a better way to look at it than all, scary networking aspects. So, Pat, I would love your thoughts, or maybe first we should start with a polling question. So let me pause there, and Nancy, if we can launch our third poll. So how many of you have taken an inventory of your current networks who may serve as an influencer and help you in landing a board seat? I think that's one of an important steps to this whole process is knowing who you know. So maybe we can do what we did before.
Absolutely. Yeah, show of hands here in the room. Who's really taken that diligent inventory of who you know and how they might be able to help you as you move into a board seat? Okay, counting hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 6, 7 lights in my way. I think that's about right. So what's that? Maybe a 10th or so? Well, no, fewer than that of our room. So.
I'm so glad you're doing the math on this.
I'm not sure I'm doing it well, but I'm doing it.
It's about a quarter of the folks we have online, so 26% indicated that they've done a current inventory. So, great place to start, do an inventory. So, Pat, let's get your thoughts on leveraging networks. How do you think about the networks you currently have? And perhaps identify additional individuals who can expand your network who you might consider as influencers in the board search process.
Sure, happy to address that. So I'd almost kind of throw a little challenge out there as you're thinking about your networks. Who's a reference? Somebody that will say, yep, they worked here, they did this, pretty much a check mark. Who's an influencer? Somebody that can possibly open a door for you if they're in the mood to do that, or has good insight into certain areas. But I'll throw out a third one. Who will be an advocate for you? And I think that's really what you want if you're actively looking for a board position. So to come back to the question, I would start close to home. We all have things that we're passionate about. It might be local soccer. It might be your church community. It might be your alma mater. It might be a specific cause or something that has touched your heart. Those are all wonderful places to look at and think about how can you use your skills and serve in those capacities as possibly a board member or a committee member to get started. I think we all do that kind of naturally, but I think take some stock in that and think about who are the people that you might go to ask a really important question. You want feedback. How have I performed or how have I given myself to this organization? And let them know that you're interested in board roles and you're interested in forwarding your interests in that area. Very important point. We were talking about my mother here just a moment ago. She would always tell me in her very specific British polite way, ask for what you need. So if you're going to someone and you really want them to be your advocate, let them know that. Let them know that you're looking for really not just honest advice, but advice around things that you may not be fully aware of. I think that was really important for me to hear. I will guess that for most of us, we're underestimating our superpowers. You know,
Yep.
we don't really see it or we don't put enough stock in it. And it's good to be reminded of those things. It's also good to be reminded of things that you need to polish up, for sure. So I would start close to home, and then of course your leadership experience and your peers, this group in the room, you are all potentially some type of influencer for everybody else in this room in different ways. But use your networks professionally, certainly do that. When you get rolling into this, if you are very serious about seeking board positions, not only knowing what your strengths are and what you have to offer, but it was a piece of advice I got from a director many years ago that was, what is your criteria to accept a role? So let's say you're in this wonderful situation where you're approached to be on 1 or 2 or 3 different boards. How do you know when to say yes? And that's where you can come back to your network at any level and ask for some advice around that. But having some sensibility around what it is that you would accept and that would be a good fit for you is important. Many times, and we've already touched on it, we're thinking about organizations that are looking at you to see, are you a fit for us? But I think you also want to ask the question the other direction. Is this organization a fit for me? Can I get my head around it? And I'll just close this up with a quick example. I was asked to be on the board of a nonprofit that did wonderful service for kids, underprivileged kids and their families. And I really thought, I don't want to be on a board seat because I want something on my resume. I want to contribute. And what are you asking me to do here? And it took a lot of conversation and wrestling before I figured out, okay, this is the thing I can do for them. This is where I can pay it forward and make a difference. So know what your role is, what you can contribute, and is that truly what you want to invest your time in? Because the best board seats, and in my humble opinion, are the ones that you feel passionate about, the ones that you really can get behind.
Oh, great advice, great advice. Anyone else care to chime in on the panel?
I would just jump in and say, seeking a board seat, particularly if you're looking for a seat on a publicly traded corporate board, or really even a privately held company, just be aware that it is a marathon and not a sprint, right? And Pat's great advice on knowing your network and how you categorize the folks around you, who is going to be your advocate, influencer, et cetera, will serve you well as you go through that journey. But it may take 1, 2, 3 years, right? So if you're at a point that you think by yourself, by a certain age, whatever that is, I'd like to serve on a publicly traded corporate board in some way, give yourself about 2 to 3 years before that to really start planning, understanding your value proposition, and planting those seeds with your network so you can hit your target.
I'm going to offer a bit of a counterpoint to both of what you said, and they're both, you've heard really good advice from Patricia and Renee here, but if I might, I'd like you all to start much earlier and generally like people. If you like people and want to get to know people, they'll want to get to know you. And you know, if you want a position, anyone you're talking to today is not going to give you something today or tomorrow. It's going to be someone that you have a relationship, and hopefully for all the right reasons. And if you build that relationship over time, if it makes sense, something serendipitous will happen. I talked about not looking for that board position, but I like people. I like getting to know people. And so I was in the right place at the right time, and the people on the board knew my skill set. And so while I wasn't looking for a board position, it wasn't strategic, I did know a lot of people. So anyway, so be strategic, but also start very, very early. And you know, the other piece of advice I would say, so most of us here are, you know, on the older side, but I know on the, at FEI, we do have some younger members. Start networking even with your peers, because by the time 20 years goes by, those peers will be people in positions of, in roles at companies where they might need someone on the board. And for people my age, 48 and older, I would say, you know, let's talk to people younger than us, because one, they know more. And two, they think they know more, which is great because they have the confidence of youth. But we're going to be working for them. They're going to need people for their boards. They're going to be leading companies. So I think just, you know, like people and things will fall into place. Start there and then be strategic. And that would be a good way.
I think one of the things that struck me is what you said is part of that, in that, you know, in addition to being, you know, liking people, be a giver. Have something of value to provide and nurture a relationship, and you might give 2 or 3 things until you can kind of call back that favor down the road. But I think leading with something, you know, the folks that you meet, the folks that you're intentional about meeting and cultivating relationships with, you know, I always try to lead with something. If I'm reaching out to meet more board members, to, you know, for example, if I'm doing a board survey and I'd like to get participation, I don't start by asking them to participate. I start by offering something that I think might be of interest to them, whether it's education, whether it's an introduction to another board member, and then only then would I ask for something in return. So I would never just come right out and ask for a board seat, but I would be strategic, I'd be thoughtful about how I go about it. But I think the key to what you're saying is you have to develop strong relationships, and it starts with assessing your network and assessing the folks in your network that you're not thinking of. You're not thinking of necessarily those layers 2 and 3 below you that are rising up through management ranks, right? Because that's, if you think about it, if you think about the average age of a board director, it's an older population, primarily of, you know, retired folks. That's rapidly changing. However, you know, those folks are the board members are the ones advising current management. So I think all of your points are very salient, and I really appreciate that. We're starting to get some questions in from the chat that I do want to acknowledge, because while we're on this, one of the suggestions was from David Brown is suggest people seek out roles on joint venture boards as a way to kind of cut their teeth on that. It's a great way to gain board experience and begin building out your experience and resume first, you know, just you know, instead of focusing externally only. So kind of looking within your companies that you're working with on how you can contribute in that avenue. And then one of the questions we got is, how do you filter out requests from individuals via LinkedIn that are reaching out regarding you serving on a board, particularly if it's a startup or a small venture? I think in that scenario, if I'm reading it right, it's looking, and I'll give the panelists a chance to answer, but I think you need to do your homework on the companies, and you need to be careful about kind of random outreaches on LinkedIn. And really be doing your homework. If you know the company, you know people connected with the company, I would start by validating from a third party. I don't know how you all feel on the panel, but blind ask for board members, not something I would, you know, necessarily jump at the chance at.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
Can I first address that, the first question, the joint venture thing? I really want to be a big advocate for that. You know, when I first moved to Dallas in 2002, I just graduated from business school. And for a year, I didn't have any friends, didn't know anyone, just worked. And then I decided to get involved with my alumni association group, and eventually joined the board and became president of the board, which means I did all the work. Similarly, I've been very active. I've been on the board of the FEI, this organization as well. And I look at those as opportunities to work, to serve, to Amy, to your point. And I think it's a really good way to, be able to get some experience kind of elevating your thinking above the management execution thinking that we do in our everyday lives. And then two, serving and having that experience of giving of yourself, because it is a lot of work, right, Meg? It's a lot of work to put an event like this together that you don't get paid for, but you do get a lot of good rewards in terms of having the experience of doing, working with people that you don't meet normally, and really broadening your network. So I'm a big advocate of that. And I'd never join a board where I didn't know, on the LinkedIn question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're all bombarded with LinkedIn requests of all kinds, right? We're all turning away quite a few. I think it's really important to be very careful, as you would with anything, but also look back to your network, and if you're interested in joining a startup board or a joint venture, look around you. You know, business associates, friends, peers that are involved in such things may make it easier for you to vet if this is a quality organization and you're interested in being a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add in a couple of things, Amy, to build on that. You know, LinkedIn is a great tool for connecting with people, but I would also say, you know, caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. If someone is reaching out to you and they're offering, you know, for you today and today only, right? The low price of X, I'll get you a board seat, you know, run, don't walk, because that is just not the way it works. Now, if someone's reaching out to you to say, hey, my friend, we have a mutual connection, I'd love to talk with you about whatever, that's a different kind of conversation altogether. So I would just be wary and be educated on what that outreach is with regard to LinkedIn. Then the other point I'd like to make, just truthfully before I forget, two things. First, if you're a sitting executive inside your company, the most important thing you need to do is make sure you have permission, either in your contract or from your CEO, to serve on another board. Because sometimes CFOs can, and sometimes they are prohibited from doing so. And the worst thing in the world is to get all the way through a process being courted for a board of directors only to find out you don't have permission, or your CEO or your current management team won't allow you to do that. So that's an important thing to do. And then secondly, kind of as a way to build board service, we were speaking about this earlier, if there's a vendor board on which you could serve, right? A lot of I know in the technology world, a lot of the big software vendors have, you know, panels of CIOs or CTOs that they put on some kind of an advisory board. If you can do that with a vendor that you use, that's another way to kind of get your board experience, so to speak, or your board chops as a way to start out. So I just wanted to make those 2 points, Amy, before they left me.
No, thank you. It's funny,
Amy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Nancy. I did get a question, which I think is a real good follow-up to what was just said. And it came to me, so I'm going to read it to you and let you just direct if you want the whole panel to answer it. It does affect a lot of our finance executives in the room, so let's get to it. I sit on one public board 5 years and sat on another one for 5 years prior to that. My CPA is current NACD board fellowship, NACD cybersecurity certification, etc. The long-needed diversity initiatives and the mass reduction of public companies over the past 10 years means fewer board seats for me, not a diverse candidate. Going forward, in my opinion, do your panelists agree?
What is the question?
I think it's about whether or not
Lack of opportunity.
the lack of opportunity because of the diversity initiative. And I get it that the 10 years of downsizing on public companies means a lot too, but there are thousands of not-for-profits out there.
I would jump in on that and say a lot of that has to do with, yes, on the face of it, I can certainly see that argument that the questioner is making. I've heard it myself in the work we do as a search firm to help companies find board directors. Yes, I've heard that, but you also have to recognize it depends upon, a lot of companies are adopting, and Amy, you'd know this as well as I do, term limits, if you will, for board service, or they're adopting, if you're older than X, thank you very much for your service, we're going to refresh our board, right? So there's a recognition that, yes, there is a limited number of boards because they are more frequently becoming private companies versus staying public. If you're not a quote-unquote diverse candidate, that might mean fewer opportunities for you. But boards are seeing that, and they're refreshing themselves to open up the avenue for more new blood or more new folks to gain board seats.
I think it is, it's like MBAs. There are too many business schools in the US and all over the world. I think there will be fewer and fewer jobs for all of us. There will be fewer and fewer board positions for all of us. Certainly 99% of board seats of publicly traded companies are held by supposedly non-diverse candidates. And people that have been in those roles for a very long time, so those term limits will help. I think as the population, the consumer gets younger and younger and more, we don't just have millennials, we have Gen Zs. We need to be, as companies, we need to be able to understand the consumer. So there are people that are on the board that are in their 30s now. So we have to compete with that as well. So it is going to be a more challenging world all around. And that's the world I've always lived in. So I don't think there's any shying away from that. So back to that first question that Amy asked us, what do we, how do we approach this? If this is something that we're interested in doing as individuals, then how do we put our best foot forward? The answer is always the same for everyone. You have to lead with your strengths, no matter who you are.
No, I think that's right. And I think for some I think that's a very timely question because diversity is such a significant topic. You have legislation in California that
NASDAQ.
Enacted, not only just enacted gender diversity, but now it has added racial diversity for public companies domiciled in California, and with a pretty aggressive timeline for adding, that diversity to the board. Some of the solutions for that, and solution's not the right word, but some of the adjustments that companies are making to that, because it's not just a check the box exercise. We need to add so many women to our board. We need to add so many, ethnic minorities to our board. It's looking at the skills that the board needs and how do we create a candidate slate broad enough that can attract the skills we need and also satisfy some of the more diverse perspectives that we don't currently have. I'll give an example of a public company that I once spoke to about, they wanted me to come in and talk about governance best practices. So when I go in and talk to a company about that, I do my homework, I look at their charters, I look at their proxy information, I look at some of the proxy contests that they're battling. And this particular company was facing a query about the lack of diversity on their board. And it was a very well-run company, very strongly, it was closely held. It was a closely held public company, and they were doing very well. And they were able for many years to kind of get beyond that argument or just kind of ignore that argument until they couldn't. And then they realized, when the majority of our actual customers, the vendors that we're working with, are women, and we have an all-male board. It's just the optics don't make sense anymore, and it's more about understanding how to do that in a way that's effective when you have an effective board. So some of the ways that they got around it was they added people to the board. They didn't necessarily get rid of the talent and the culture that they had created on that board, but they added additional talent. And I think for some boards, that is a logical step. For others, it may not be due to whatever financial considerations or what have you, or legal considerations. But as I believe it was Renee that mentioned earlier, there are companies considering tenure limits. There are term limits that companies enact, and they also have kind of clauses in those agreements that says, if someone is really doing a great job and he or she is hitting that maximum, we can extend their term, if we have full agreement of the board or whatever. So there are creative ways that boards are dealing with this specific issue. But I think companies are also just recognizing the need for certain skills, certain perspectives. I mean, it's not just about racial and ethnic diversity and gender diversity. It's truly about getting different perspectives, whether it's age-related, whether it's other skill sets that have not traditionally been part of the board. Maybe it's HR, since there's such a huge emphasis on human capital. Maybe we don't have the right focus on that right now. Maybe it is marketing in some cases. Maybe it's digital transformation. Maybe it is cyber. But there's a lot of different avenues, and every company is different on how they choose to compose the board and what their relevant needs are. And it goes back to kind of the skills matrices that most boards utilize when they're determining composition. But I like that you brought this back to, and I'm going to reiterate it, Florence. It is about your skill set. It's about your superpowers. It's about what you bring, what you can demonstrate as qualifications, as experience, what sets you apart. And I think one of the best exercises that I've ever been through, and my friend Sheila Ronning, who has founded Women in the Boardroom, does this exercise with all of her members, and it's more or less your elevator pitch, but it's very specific into, let's break this down into a very clear-cut mission statement of yourself as to what your values are and what you can bring to a board. And it's a great exercise that she walks people through, and if you haven't thought like that, please do yourself a favor and sit down and say, what would you do if someone asked you, well, why do you want to be in a board? What do you bring to the table? Just think about that very simple statement. It's not an hour-long conversation. It's really quick and to the point, and that just kind of makes everything kind of come into perspective. Hopefully that some of the things that we answered gave you some perspective, but I do want to cut to our last topic, because a lot of the things I'm seeing through the chat get into that, and that's really the resources to preparing for board service. So we have a polling question, so let's lead with the fourth polling question, if we could. And that's it. Who believes they have a solid understanding of board oversight role and responsibilities?
And same question here in the room. Who, show of hands, believes you have a solid understanding of board oversight roles and responsibilities? Okay, 1, 2. About a third? What do you think? About a third, half? Thank you.
Nancy, how about online?
Sounds about right.
Sounds about
for
right.
a group, for this group.
9% online.
Yeah.
A little more online. All right, so Florence, my question to you is, as part of the preparation for board service, maybe you can share your personal story of shifting gears from wearing your management hat to being charged with governance oversight.
Yes, thank you for that, Amy. And we talked about this in our prep call. And I love how you talk about your superpower. So my superpower as an executive is I get things done. Sadly, that's not the superpower that I need as someone on a board. So I really had to shift when I joined the board of the Refugee Services of Texas. Now, I will share, to your point about passion, it's not necessarily that I had a deep passion for the topic, but I generally have a passion for strategy and business. To me, that's the only game in town. And when I was asked to join, I did a lot of my homework, right? I talked to people in the nonprofit world because I didn't know much about the nonprofit world. I talked to executives, I talked to people that were on the boards of public-private company to try and get a perspective. And then I discovered the NACD and the educational resources there. But like a good little student, I did a lot of research, and I realized that really, the shift from being an individual contributor to a manager and a manager to an executive. And when you're on the board, you really have to sit on your hands a lot. We're grappling with some really interesting issues, for instance, at RST. It's been a very interesting few years for any nonprofit in the refugee space. Also, the RST has expanded its mandate from just refugees to serving populations of displaced children in the country. I'm sorry, I'm completely blanking on. And so it's a broader mandate beyond refugees to domestic populations as well. And so there's a huge strategy component of that. And then again, a bit of my get things done hat and my consultant hat. I can see the level of maturity, and I'm on the finance committee of the finance organization of the strategy. But a nonprofit board especially has some professional members, and then there typically are people that are very passionate about the topic, and our community are folks from the community. So it's a group of fairly diverse folks that are on the board. So, and really I'm the one who knows the least because I'm one of the newer members of the board. So for me, it's been, I really need to understand the mission of the organization and where it needs to go, and how do I provide oversight and advice at a very, very, very strategic level, and let management do what they do best. And that's been a big shift for me, and hard. Very, very hard. So I want to go in there and fix it. But
and I agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for newer board members, is to kind of get their hands off the tactical and really focus at a level up here, and allow management to do what management does, but be there to guide and oversee that. And I think one of the things that I've heard most recently through COVID-19 is the expectation. It's kind of switching a little bit in the sense that if there's board members that have specific experience with, call it, shifting revenue streams or loss of customers or disruption or what have you, those board members are becoming more of true advisors to the management teams, and they're rolling up their sleeves and they're having more frequent conversations. So we do have a question in here about kind of time commitment for board service. So I just figured I'd work that in while you made that point, because the time commitment for a board, it varies greatly depending on the boards you're serving on. For public company boards, I would say that the timing is often much more significant, and there's lots of studies and research around that, so you probably have much more, solid data in that area. So I would say on average, if you're on a public company board, you're spending upwards of 200 to 300 hours annually, and that's because you're meeting, depending on your committee, the types of committees you're on, the full board meets, for an audit committee member, specifically, they're meeting at least 4 times a year. They're also meeting in executive sessions with management and their auditors. They'll meet, offline occasionally with phone calls to the audit partner. So it's just, there's a lot, and there's not kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, but it is a significant time commitment. And there's lots of talk about people being overboarded. So you have kind of the serial board members, I'll call them, that, are on 5, 6 public company boards. They're chairing their local symphony board. They're, they're way overstretched with the complexities that a lot of these companies are facing. And I speak primarily with my experience on public company boards, but there's many, many large private companies and more complex private companies that have significant needs of a governance nature as well. So I think the time commitment is pretty stringent. Would you all agree? And what's your experience, Ben?
Absolutely. I'm facing what I call board weekend here coming up. I get my board packet on Thursday, and I spend time throughout the weekend doing my homework and really making sure I understand thoroughly what is in there. And then by about Sunday afternoon, I write an email to the CEO, and I I don't know if I'm the only board member that does that, but I feel compelled to get some of my thoughts in that person's hands early. So I think it's about your commitment and your interest in learning in order to serve the best. So it does take quite a bit of time. I certainly wouldn't, with the role that I have right now, I wouldn't take on more and more and more board roles, but what you do take on, be committed to for your term and do your best. And I personally think if you go into it looking at serving and learning, kind of going hand in hand, it's the way to get the best result for everybody. The other thing I would bring up on the diversity point is I encourage everybody to look at it as diversity of thought. Yes. So if you bring something new into this mix of a board that maybe it's been in place for quite a while, you're the new person in, it really doesn't matter what you look like or where you came from. It really matters what comes out of your mouth. What are the questions that you ask? What are the thoughts that you put out there that are provocative, that are going to help that board and ultimately the management committees that come in to present to you to really think about things differently. If all you're doing is shaking your head yes and agreeing, you're not doing your job. So diversity of thought, in my experience, even as leading IT teams and things as tactical, certainly Flo and I have a lot of similar background in that. The best teams are the ones that are diverse thinkers. They're bringing different concepts to the table and they can wrestle with it. So I would encourage you to really think about it that way. And you may be serving on boards right now, and if you go into it really recognizing that, you may actually have a better way to draw out the best of each other, which is a superpower in itself.
No question. And I would jump into to Florence's story earlier. Same. The very, very, very first nonprofit board I served on, I was so gung-ho and just certain that I was the reason, the salve for all their ills, and that I could go and solve all their problems. I mean, it was a wonderful education because I couldn't have been more wrong. That wasn't what they needed or why I was there, right? But the expression that I've always heard, and I have found it to be very true for a board member, to balance between tactics and strategy, is nose in. You get your nose in the business, but you keep your fingers out, because you don't want to be, messing around with the company, because that's not your role. But your role is to have your nose into it, keep your fingers out.
That's really good.
Agreed. Yeah.
Agreed. So Pat, I want to bring in the concept of you being a CEO and also sitting on your own board, as well as, I believe Renee does the same thing. So how do these roles differ? So if you're the CEO, and in some cases you have a CEO that's also the head of the board, in other cases you have a split role where you have a separate chair of the board. So tell me a little bit about that. And what have you been able to leverage to be an effective board member? Excuse me.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I'm CEO here in the United States, and I'm also CEO in India. And so we have a company on either side that partners together, tremendous synergy together. Just a side note, when I went to fill out my director's information in India, it was the form literally said son of, and I thought, well, okay, I'm not the son, I'm the only daughter of, so I'm going to put daughter and see how this goes. So they granted me a director's license in India.
And they didn't ask you for your mother's name, right?
They did not ask me for my mother's name. So, I grew up in a big Irish family. I have 4 brothers. I jokingly tell them they're the reason I'm like this, because they kind of toughened me up at a young age doing wrestling in the living room and all that. So, it's interesting as CEO, and I don't care where you are, in the world doing this, what you got to realize very quickly is that you set the tone. If you're thoughtful, if you're concerned about values, if you're gunning for profits, everything you say is going to be completely scrutinized and paid attention to. So you really need to think about what you're doing and how you're presenting yourself. And what I got to very quickly was, I'm going to be me. I'm going to lead with my values. I'm going to put those values out there for everybody to consume, including my advisory board. And my partners are very well aware that I'm going to have strengths and I'm going to have holes. And I'm going to rely on everybody around me to help figure that out. So having a dose of humility is very, very important in this whole thing. But you do have this unique position as CEO or board chair to set the tone, set the agenda, and people are listening, and you need to give some thought to that. So how that differs from other roles. So when I'm on a board of a bank, I'm also on their audit committee. You know, I'm not setting the tone. Somebody else is setting the tone, setting the agenda. But my job is really to ask a lot of questions, do my homework, and give my best guidance. But absolutely, yes, I'm pulling on my first role as CEO of my own company to inform and ask questions. And I think that's what we all need to do. We need to pull from different areas of our life and pull in those questions, those perspectives that are most important. Being on an audit committee as a non-finance person, you're probably like, why in the world is she on the audit committee, right? I have a risk and strategy background academically. So again, you come at it from a different point of view. Am I the banker that needs to be, you know, asking those questions? No, they're not asking me to be that role. They're asking me to be the role that I bring to the table. So give yourself credit for that, but also know why you're there. That's very, very important. It is different, absolutely, from being on boards for nonprofits. For an example, those board roles are probably very operational. You're probably going to give a lot of time rolling up your sleeves, being part of what might be considered the management team or the operation team. Quite different than a corporate board role, right? And then there's also something that maybe we haven't talked a lot about, and those are advisory board roles. So I've had one opportunity to start an advisory board for a think tank that brought in a number of corporate leaders. What a wonderful experience. But if you're ever asked to be an advisor for a company, not on their board, but being on their advisory board in some kind, I would absolutely take that first as a compliment. And secondly, give that a lot of thought. It may not sound like the echelon of board roles, but you have quite a lot of room to contribute. You're not necessarily under the guise of you're just governance, right? But you have a lot of room to be a thinker in that organization, help shape that. And I think especially given the year we just came out of and we're still figuring it out, there's a lot of need for advisors. And I know for my own company, I have 4 partners. 3 partners and myself, and I actually formed an advisory board in 2020 because I wanted to be able to very freely and have very good confidential conversations with people that I respected. So I interviewed about 12 people, and I certainly took a lot less onto my board, but those advisors are precious to me. So if you're ever given that opportunity, please consider that. And those are roles that you can actually raise your hand and say, hey, do you have an advisory board? And maybe you're going to get a connection there as well.
There's actually a very timely question on that in our chat, and that's knowledge about what M&A advisory boards are in the DFW area. Do any of you have some insight into that?
M&A advisory board?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the corporate ACG. What is an M&A advisory board? Does anyone in the room know? Yeah.
So
I would, yeah, I would think that, you know, it could be a couple of different things. I don't know if there's a specific, when I think of M&A advisory board, I think of operating partner at a private equity firm, or I think of someone who is on a board of advisors for a portfolio company and provides their knowledge or expertise. I don't specifically know the construct the questioner is referring to, but I'm sure there are opportunities to, as Pat was saying, to contribute as an advisor. You really do need to think about those carefully. I'm on an advisory board for a friend's company, and it's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience to be able to offer a different point of view to that CEO entrepreneur. So.
fair enough. We do have another polling question, and I do want to be mindful because our audience is, the bulk of you all are financial executives, so we want to talk about some committee work. So what type of traditional board committee may be of most interest to those of you in the audience? And your options are audit risk committee, maybe show of hands. Sorry, go ahead, Renee. Stole your thunder.
2, 3.
Okay. Compensation Committee,
2.
3, I saw 3, yep.
Nomination and Governance Committee,
Nom and Gov, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 6?
6.
Yep.
okay, and Finance Committee.
I wonder. In this room, probably
Quite a few.
several. I saw at least 7 or 8 hands go up for that.
All right. So what do we have online? We have, so pretty split between Audit and Risk Committee, 34%, 49% Finance Committee, 11% Compensation, and 6% Nom and Gov. So, okay. So maybe as we're getting closer, and I do want to give time for audience, in-person audience questions. So one of the things that, you know, we want to talk about today is maybe some of the evolving expectations with regard to audit committees and finance committees. And I think there's an awful lot going on, and maybe it's a broader question into how risk is determined at the board level. And this is appropriate for all types of boards. And it's really at the board level when you're just determining which of the committees that you established are handling which types of risks. And often you can find out that information when you're doing your research on boards by looking at their charters. You know, companies with good governance practices outline the duties and responsibilities of each of their committees using committee charters, and they're supposed to be refreshing those annually. And one of the first things that I do when I talk to a company is I look at their charters. And if it's an audit committee, I do a deep dive into their risks, and then I look at some of the issues that are going, you know, they're being reporting on, whether it's their 10K or their financials or other information, and I see if that still makes sense. And oftentimes we'll come up with some kind of a laundry list of items that could be refreshed. So that's one way of considering some of the, you know, the expectations and getting a feel for the types of duties and responsibilities that each of these committees have and what you may have to offer. I love the fact that Pat is on the audit committee and she doesn't necessarily have a financial reporting background, because I think everybody should serve on an audit committee. Maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a CPA and I have my MBA and MS in accounting, but I think you get so much information about a company's business operations and their financial position when you actually do sit on the audit committee and you see all of the aspects of the business that filters through the financial reporting process, because that gives a great overview of risk and opportunity. I'll hush here and I'll see, maybe we can open it up for some audience questions to the extent we have it, or some additional comments from our panel.
I think to your point, Amy, one thing I would say, one strategy I've taken is I've joined a couple of committees. My strategy has been join a committee that I know something about and join a committee that I know nothing about.
With the diversity, what you see in the examples where youth actually becomes diversity angle in certain industries where where your target market's one thing. If you have a bunch of 50-year-old, gray-haired guys like me, it would be a good thing to do that. Can you speak to that a little bit, and even in terms of all boards, whether they're seeing that millennial generation coming up being the consumer force at some point, that does become an important thing to have younger board or not.
Yeah, we've addressed that
Rules of engagement, could we repeat that question for those that are virtual?
So for those online, to paraphrase your question, have we seen youth be considered by companies as an element of diversity, and what were the circumstances around that? Did I get that? Yes. From a board standpoint, of course.
Sure, I can address it from both the banks that I've been involved with have definitely seen that their current and future customers are certainly the youth that are opening accounts and starting to invest and buying houses and all that. And they may not necessarily be doing a great job reaching out to them. Younger people are also very technically minded and very comfortable with technology. So So what we did in both situations was we allowed there to be committees that brought in people of various age groups very specifically and got very specific with the kind of input that we needed from them, recognizing that some of them may be candidates for a board role in the future. I think we quickly got to the point of saying they're not ready for a board role yet, but they certainly can contribute. And if they're actively interested in contributing and helping us form business ideas and challenges and questions, you know, they would be a future candidate for sure. One of the angles, just as food for thought, that we took was we went to some of the local universities and posed the question to graduate students. So then you're getting adult learners that are obviously investing in their academic prowess, but you know, you're kind of getting a different perspective of thought, perhaps. So that was one way that we addressed it.
Yeah, and I'll pull that thread from a different way. I did do a board search for a publicly traded corporation a few years ago, and they were a company that was undergoing, as many are today, a digital transformation. They were trying to find ways to reach new audiences with their target, with their products and services. And so they did want us to bring someone on the board. And you never talk about age in search, right? But this was a situation where we brought in someone who was under 40, right? That was exactly what they wanted. This person was an officer in a California-based technology company at one point in his career and had private equity experience, right? So it was a good fit and fit that business strategy, right? So it always goes back to, just as you look at your personal value proposition and how you would work in a board situation, you look as a search firm doing a search for a board, you look at what that business needs, right? So maybe they did in fact need that diversity of youth and that perspective on technology, and that board member proved to be very, very valuable, right? So that's another way to kind of answer your question. You're welcome.
I'll share my experience about my current board. And, you know, youth, the definition changes, right? The other day I read in the newspaper about someone who, I mean, this was sad, passed away at 42. And I said, oh my gosh, she's so young. My answer would have been, you know, my comment would have been very different 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But we had someone join our board very recently, was a very young person who's from a technology company. But for the same reason, in the sense, well, similar, qualified, very qualified, but she has experience as she herself was a refugee. So she brings that experience. We're not necessarily looking for technology, but she brought a lot of relevant experience and passion into the you know, into the conversation. And it's amazing. She will ask questions that, you know, the rest of us would not ask, right? Because we know better, but it leads to a better conversation, and it leads to us kind of rethinking certain things. And so I do see, and even in the public kind of news domain, I've observed that there are a lot of people, or more people in their 30s and 40s that are in board positions, even at larger companies. And the qualification is still the qualification. You know,
That's
they
right.
have to bring something to the table.
Mm-hmm.
It's not age.
Right.
Well, it's age and everything else.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank everybody. Thank you for such a great presentation. I think that's going to turn out to be one of our favorite topics and one of our favorite presentations. I think y'all have hit on something that's really of interest to a lot of our members. Once again, I want to thank our moderator, Amy Rozic, our speakers, Renee Arrington, Dr. Patricia Conley, and Florence Lowe. Thank you guys so much. Just a couple of real quick housekeeping things. First of all, for CPE, if you're here in person, we have the cards inside your name tag. Obviously, you're answering questions online to get your CPE credit. And now we're going to head into our social networking period. People who are online will go into breakout rooms. And we have some sponsors hosting those. I very much appreciate them doing the hosting. Here, we've been really lucky the previous 2 times in October and November and had perfect days to go out on the lawn. Perfect temperature, beautiful evenings. I think it's going to be about upper 30s, 40s right now. So I think we're just going to do it in the normal rooms we do networking in. which is the entry rooms and the side room here. And we're going to have a bar in the back of this room and one outside. I would hope that everybody could try to do this as safely as possible, try to not shake hands, hug, the things we like to do. But anyway, thank you so much for being here in person and virtually, and I look forward to seeing you guys at dinner. Thank you.
Você que me ensinou a ouvir, foi você que soube achar isso em mim. Sem te ver não sei mais o que sentir, só ouvindo aquele espaço ali, lonely, lonely. Todo dia te sinto e fico pensando que você pode até me ouvir. Todo dia te sinto e fico pensando que você pode até me ouvir. Todo lonely, 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 lonely.